How to keep it together in chaos. We'll take about 30 minutes. We're going to roll through this. Thanks again for jumping on today. I'm going to move pretty fast, mostly because I just probably talk a little fast to begin with, but I know your time is precious. You got a lot of stuff to do, and I imagine you got a lot of these Zoom calls you got to make. So I'll share a little bit about myself. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I ended up tackling this topic. We'll get into a little bit of the meat of this about 5 minutes, 10 minutes in, and then hopefully we'll be able to give you some takeaways and some application that'll help you wherever you're at. So if that sounds good, let's get rolling. I do want to say thanks, by the way, to Will Jones and to Justin Ellis from Thompson Child and Family Focus, and to Jim Riggins from Technicom for just hosting this series. I think it's awesome. I really love what they're doing to say, hey, at this time, whatever we can do to support business leaders and community leaders, and frankly, folks who are involved in teams, whatever we can do, the better. So thanks for the invite to be a part. I love it. And all right, here we go. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. For those of you who don't actually know me, I'm going to roll through some slides. This is going to be like 20 years in 8 slides in 30 seconds. I am 43 years old. That is me on my wedding day in the year 2000. I've got 4 kids. That's my oldest, who is actually in college, and then 3 others, my youngest of whom is about to turn 13 tomorrow. So as of tomorrow, I've got 4 teenage girls in my house, which I don't know if you've got kids or if you were one of these, one of several siblings in your house, but 4 teenage girls is awesome. Those are my 2 dogs. We've got 2 huskies because we're from Seattle. We went to the University of Washington, my wife, Kelly, and I. And of course, if you go to UW, University of Washington, or the Washington Huskies, and why wouldn't you have 2 Huskies to really show your allegiance to the school? I'm a massive Seahawks fan. I've had season tickets. Well, I guess I don't anymore, but I had season tickets while I was in college. As a matter of fact, I took out my student loans so I could buy season tickets to the Seahawks. So, not necessarily the best use of student loan, but it was awesome while I was there. I spent about 10 years working on staff at Elevation Church here locally in Charlotte, which was about the same time that I decided I was going to get a perm about 10 years ago. I thought that was a good idea, which was much better than the haircut I had in college, which is kind of a real John Lennon look, the long ponytail with the wireframe glasses. So that's a little bit about me. Currently, I work with this guy. Well, not with this guy, but I do work at an agency called Tiny Horse. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we do, so you've got a little bit of backstory, and it'll help you understand why I have any reason and right to be the one on this side of the screen talking to you about some of this stuff today. So Tiny Horse is a marketing and media agency, and in 2012, when the X Factor was coming to the US, it was being brought here by Simon Cowell, he said, I've got a show that distributes currently on linear TV. And it's a show that we think is going to be successful. Frankly, it's been successful in the UK, and we'd like to bring it to the US. However, we're having some issues on how to take this IP, this property, beyond linear TV, beyond broadcast TV. We want to take it digital. So how can you help us, Tiny Horse, figure out how to distribute this thing so it'll be a little more accessible for people on phones and tablets and laptops? So we did this. This was pre-me, before I was with Tiny Horse, but we did this and had a great deal of success with it. We were able to build the 5th largest YouTube channel on the planet. And when you have some success on a big property like the X Factor and a name like Simon Cowell, a lot of people come knocking. Those people basically were other TV shows and eventually movies. So we started working on American Idol and The Voice and Dancing with the Stars, and that turned into movies like Transformers. And most of that's done in our office today. Most of our entertainment work's done with entertainment brands. In our Charlotte office, which is where I'm out of, Charlotte, North Carolina, we are doing the same type of work, but we're primarily doing it around brands. So in short, I would say we're trying to build digital audiences and then monetize those audiences, or help brands figure out how to do something with those audience, either create content or create products, promotions, campaigns, whatever it is. So LA is doing most of our entertainment type work. Charlotte's doing most of our brand work. And then we've got an office in New York that's doing a little bit of everything, but on a slightly different scale. And they're doing it a lot in Spanish speaking markets or international markets. So that's a little bit of the backstory of what we do at Tiny Horse. And I will tell you that it's a segue into what's really important to me. I would say that how we do what we do is equally as important, if not more important. So for all of you, I'm assuming we've got a combination of business leaders, people who are serving either in executive type roles, or you're on teams, or maybe you're working with a nonprofit or even out of the church space, and you've got a pretty clear picture of it, what it is that you do. I want to challenge you as we walk through this conversation to place an equal emphasis on how it is that you're doing that. And I've got a lot of philosophies and theories on the significance here. I mean, a lot of you are probably familiar with Simon Sinek. About 10 years ago, he released a kind of a thought around this golden circle. I'd jump on YouTube and go search for it if you're not familiar with it. But this golden circle is basically the progression of before what is how, and before how is why. Totally agree with it. However, I think a lot of times when you get into the marketplace and you start talking about business, a lot of people are not making decisions on the fly by stopping and saying, you know what, let me really take some time to think through this. I want to align with businesses and brands and companies whose why is just like my why. It would be awesome if it worked that way. It doesn't. It would also be awesome if my kids flipped off their lights every time they left, or maybe they put their dishes away every time we were having a meal together. It doesn't always happen. But I'm encouraging you to say, let's go beyond what and let's focus on how. This is also the major emphasis I'll place on culture. So I'm going to talk about culture for just a second. I'm not going to go into too much detail here. But when we focus on how, this was what I decided to write my recent book about. So I released a book earlier this year called You Little Jerk, and it's about how to create culture. And it's partially because I think how we do what we do is part of what helps us to enjoy it. So I want to talk briefly about what culture is for a couple of minutes, and then it'll make sense a little bit more as we get into how to manage crisis or keep things together in the midst of crisis. So when I talk about culture, I'm really talking about how we do things, right? A way of life. And I would say it includes a variety of different things, but I'm going to define it very simply. I'm going to say that your culture that you're a part of, whether it's at home, whether it's in the workplace, your way of life is a set of behaviors, beliefs, and values that you hold true, that generally are accepted. You have to accept them. You don't always have to like them, but you do accept them, even if it's by, omission or by your silence. We do accept them, which is part of what makes them a way of life, and we transfer them to others. And ultimately, we do all of this without consideration, which I think is, there's a lot to this. I'm blowing through it in about 3 minutes, but I want to do so we can get to kind of the meat here in the conversation. The reason I bring this up is when we start talking about culture in a way, different ways of life, I think the thing to focus on mostly is this last line, without consideration, which means culture is primarily about our reflexes. This is the very best way to figure out what your culture is about. Stop and take a look at the reflexes of the people all around you. Meaning, if you pay attention to whether or not people, for example, hit deadlines, that'll tell you a lot about your culture. Not if it happens once, but if it happens consistently, if it's a trend that you start to recognize amongst the people on your team, your organization, your business, your employees. I'm using this as an example. Are they hitting deadlines? If they do, without being asked, because it's a reflex of theirs, well, maybe punctuality, responsibility, hitting deadlines is a part of your culture. And you can identify it by seeing the reflexes without you having to say, hey, everybody, turn this in on time, turn this in by this date. Maybe it's about details, meaning, do you have individuals who, when they don't have answers or they don't have the details that they need to actually accomplish what they're doing, they'll go out and proactively seek them out? If so, if you see that consistently, well, maybe part of your culture is that you have a high level of proactivity. Conversely, you can also look at the reflexes that aren't present, and you can see, oh, wow, nobody actually does this. I hear a lot of, well, yeah, I didn't know, so I didn't do it. Well, that'll tell you a lot about your culture. If you take this not just from the workplace, but from the home, you can say, well, I referenced it earlier, but what about the dishes? Do my kids actually pick up their dishes and walk them to either the sink? Do they put them in the dishwasher? You can find out a lot about the culture of your home by saying, what are the reflexes of my kids, my family? What are the ways that I respond when my kids bring me news that I'm not really excited about? You're looking at reflexes. And the reason I'm highlighting this is it'll make more sense as we get into this, because I'm going to challenge you to say, now that we're looking at a crisis or we're looking at a recession, how are we choosing to respond? And then moreover, how will we integrate that into our culture? And then will we be able to see that we're making a difference by noticing the change in our reflexes over time? when I came up with the title for the book, You Little Jerk, it was about like a knee jerk, a reflex reaction. And the whole concept is based around, if you can pay attention to the reflexes that you currently possess, you may be able to dictate, based on how you structure and how you reinforce different behaviors, beliefs, and values, new reflexes that you want to see implemented. And eventually, that little tiny knee jerk, that little tiny reflex will be the indication that you're actually making progress. So, all right, with that said, I'm going to look at today's content through the lens of a marketer. And I hope you'll find it helpful. And again, if you've got questions or follow-up, feel free to email me. I'll throw my email at the end. Or if you need to track it down, it's just larry@tinyhorse.com. Okay, so how to keep it together in chaos. Let me start by talking about positioning. I'll tell you that from a marketing standpoint, this is the number one thing that I think most brands generally tend to overlook. Meaning brands are almost always focused on some version. And when I use the term brand, by the way, you may not be familiar with that, or you may not like it. Maybe it sounds impersonal. I'm just generally lumping us into these different categories of saying these different brands that we're creating or being a part of growing. Brands, whether it's your business or you certainly don't think of your family as a brand, but I know that you know of families that kind of have a family brand, meaning you think certain things when you think about this family. So apply it how you need to apply it. But when it comes to positioning, most brands generally overlook this step. They focus on mission, they focus on vision, they focus on the look and feel of the brand, or they focus on the tone or the messaging of the brand. All those things are really important, and I certainly believe in them. We help a lot of clients focus on those things very specifically. I think if you skip this piece of it, I think you're missing a massive piece. And positioning, to summarize it in a sentence, is basically, what space can you own in someone's brain that when they think of a real estate agent, they think of you? So how are you positioned in somebody's brain? Again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this, but I want to establish this because it'll help us as we walk through the rest of the presentation. So positioning is really about 4 factors. 1, it's about audience. Do you know the audience that you're actually talking to? By the way, I think this is either going to be posted online after the fact, or if not, screenshots, take notes as you want to, because I'm going to be moving kind of quick here. Positioning is about your audience. Do you understand the audience? And we'll get into some of the particulars about audience in just a minute. But do you know your audience? Do you know your competition? And do you know what your competition is currently offering to that particular audience? And if so, do you know where it is that you can actually win? Where can you grab the space in someone's head when they think about a specific service or a product that it is that you're offering? What can you be the best at? This is really about, a unique selling proposition or value proposition. When it comes to positioning, you got to know your audience, got to know what the competition is doing so you can identify, where you can win and own that space. What are you the best at? And honestly, why are you the best at it? So this is really a reason to believe for those of you who kind of like marketing speak. So the most important thing here regarding how to keep it together in crisis is audience. Generally, audience is highly influenced by our understanding of the demographics of our audience. 18 to 25-year-old people who are living online or shopping online. There's a lot of demographics. You might say 43-year-old Korean man who disappointed his mom by not becoming a doctor, right? That would be a demographic. I know some people who are like that, who fall into that category. Knowing our audiences is largely about the demographics. In times of crisis or recession, this is the first major takeaway. Demographics give way to psychographics in crisis. So this would be a great thing to screenshot or to copy down. Meaning, the difference between demographics and psychographics, demographics are more about characteristics and metrics. They're quantifiable. It's quantifiable data. It's age, it's an ethnicity, it's a geography, it's an interest, right? You're looking at demographics of a person. Psychographics have much more to do with lifestyle. They have more to do with motivation, with values. Because in crisis or recession, you're dealing with people who are experiencing a higher level of emotion than normal, our shift away from just being demographically driven to being psychographically driven is really important. There's a really great study that Harvard did that, it may have been a study, honestly, that came out after the 2008 recession, but certainly it still applies today. They will I'm not a psychologist by any means. I don't pretend to be, but I do know how to read. And so I can read articles and I can assimilate information. So I feel pretty good about that. By the way, if you're not a reader, I will tell you as a leader, and all of you, if you're on this today, certainly I lump you into that category. Read and read more. At the very least, read 15 minutes a day. You'll be shocked at the information that you can ingest in 15 minutes a day if you want to go and learn new information. But Harvard put up the study about understanding people's response to crisis and recession, and I thought it was fantastic. And when you look at purchasing categories, this will come back together as we walk through a couple of different layers to this. When you look at purchasing categories, you see that there's a few different ways that people generally respond to purchases. This is just general information. They say, yes, I need that product. This is an essential for me. Almost every type of person, every type of shopper, every type of consumer says there are certain things that are essentials for me. I need to have shelter. I need to have food. I need to have transportation. I need to have clothing, right? It makes sense. These are yes. I'm putting them in the yes category. Then you've got this maybe category, which I would say are indulgences that we can justify. Right? I don't totally need that, but this would be good. I should probably get this. Put that in the maybe category. Then you've got a later category, which is indulgences that are a little more challenging to justify. And then you've got this no category, which is like, you know what? I'm just not going to purchase this regardless of whether I want it or not. This is a no. This is stuff that's like superfluous. I don't really need it. It's ultimately unnecessary. The reason I'm identifying these purchasing categories is when we start thinking about psychographics or the way people think or the way that they're motivated, if you understand that everybody puts their purchasing behavior or their consumer behavior into these categories, whether they realize it or not, it'll help you understand the next step. Because right now, if you start thinking about just the economy alone, okay, there's a lot of other elements to what's going on right now as we're all wrestling through coronavirus circumstances. It has been 1940 is the last time we had an unemployment rate over 14%. And I don't know what the exact unemployment rate is today, but I know that the projections are that we're probably going to end up somewhere in like the 12, 13, maybe even 14%. It has only been in double digits one time since 1940. It was 1982, and it was 12.5%. 2009, after the big recession in 2008, it hit 9.9%. We're potentially going to hit double digits again in 2020 for the first time in a very long time. So having this mindset in mind, which is an understanding of the psychographics of the consumers, so the people who are interacting with us, will really help us a great deal. And I'll help us translate this a little bit more to things that aren't so business-centric in just a minute. Okay, so purchasing categories. We've got this first. Next, if we look at the marketplace mindsets of people, okay, so these are things that apply very specifically to a psychographic of any audience that it is that we're trying to reach. So if you work for a ministry, for example, you absolutely have an audience that you're trying to reach, even though generally speaking, a lot of people will say, well, we're for everybody. Sure, you're for everybody, but you're probably for people who like a certain type of music or come from a certain ethnicity, live in a certain geography. So you do have a specific audience. If you're a business, probably based on your service or your product, you've got a specific audience that you're generally targeting. I'm encouraging you to say, during challenging times where people are faced with transition uncertainty like never before, you got to start paying attention to mindsets. Here are 4 mindsets that develop in times of uncertainty. So I've kind of simplified them down to 4 different labels that I think will help us understand it. Red light, which is basically, I'm feeling vulnerable. I don't necessarily want to do everything I've always done. I'm postponing some purchases. I'm shifting away from purchasing my standard purchases, brand purchases. I'm finding replacements for things, but I am like scaling way, way, way back. So marketplace mindset, motivation that somebody has. There's a yellow light, which is similar to a red light. Yellow light is the most abundant in the marketplace. It's the largest segment of consumers, but they're a little more certain. They have a little more assurance based on either how they've managed their finances. Red light may often be a lower income tier. However, it's not only that. You've got a lot of higher income affluent people who fall in this category because of their personalities. Yellow is a little more of a general, it's probably the most broad stroke across the consumer segments. And this group is generally resilient. They feel optimistic. They're excited that it's not all doom and gloom for them. So you've got this marketplace mindset that I'm labeling yellow. They become much more like a red in their motivation and their decision making when they feel pain for a prolonged period of time. Okay. So you've got red light and yellow lights in terms of mindsets. Then you've got green lights, which are like, we feel fine. We have done a great job of positioning ourselves for the future. Regardless of the circumstance, we generally feel like we're going to be able to weather the storm in chaos, in crisis, in a recession. These are oftentimes people who fall in the top 5% of the of earners, of people who are prepared for the future. These are people who are not necessarily wealthy, but they're confident in their financial state. And then you've got this mindset, which is the no light mindset, which is like, I basically live for the moment. I never had a budget. I still am not going to have a budget. I am living for today. Not a whole lot changes for me until I lose my job. And as soon as I'm unemployed, then a lot will change for me. But for now, I am rolling. I feel great. And it's not necessarily that they're trying to be irresponsible. It's a little bit of how they're wired. And so this particular consumer mindset is like, yeah, I get it, but I'm still going to keep living life. Okay, so you've got 4 consumer categories of how people make decisions, and then 4 mindsets of that people currently have when you're studying the psychographics of your audiences. On the left side here on the y-axis, I'm putting these marketplace mindsets on this axis. And on the other axis, I'm putting your purchasing categories. Okay, so you've got these and you're combining them. In a normal economy, in the normal times, and I use the term normal, just kind of openly assuming that, we're not going to be too particular about me just saying back to normal, even though I know we probably won't go back to anything that resembles exactly what we all left. But when things are more normal, how about that? Most of these pieces are operating fairly fluidly. They're all present in the economy and in each of our business models. When you face crisis, here's what generally happens. This particular audience and this particular segment stays the same. So people who need essentials generally always need essentials. If you're in crisis or you're not in crisis, yeah, you still need food, shelter, clothing, transportation. It's pretty straightforward. Not a lot changes here. So I'm asking you to pay attention to what it is that you're doing and how does it affect or influence or coordinate with the essentials that somebody needs. Next, we'll look at this segment. This I would put in the, okay, there's some shifting here. If you've got somebody who's got a green light mentality and they are in, I think you can see this. Oh, I don't have a cursor. Actually, I think I might have. I think I can do this. We'll see. We'll see if I can figure this out. Oh, shoot. I'm so sorry. I'm just like killing everybody right now. Okay. You know what? I'm sorry. I can't figure this out. I was going to draw on the screen. Oh, there we go. There we go. Oh, boy. All right. I think I've done something here. Okay, I hope you can still see the screen because I can no longer see my cursor and I've got this big squiggly line on the screen. I don't know if it's going to go away. So I'll do my best to clean it up. So if you got somebody in the green light category who says, I'm well positioned, I've prepared for this, and I'm looking at purchases that I might want to make, but I think I can push them off. Those are going to be affected. Those are going to be far less likely to even be on the grid or to be in the consideration set for that type of consumer. So everything in this blue segment, I got to get rid of the squigglies. It's killing me. Okay. Everything that's in that blue section is going to be much more likely to be affected adversely, meaning you're probably going to see a lot slower of a response and potentially less activity in that area. If I take one more layer and peel it back, oh my gosh, I can't get back to my screen. Okay, there we go. This category in particular is going to be the hardest hit. If you're talking about the mindset of different types of consumers in the marketplace, these 3 particular categories are going to be the ones that are most affected and the ones that if your business is based around these, you're probably going to have the greatest challenge in trying to prompt folks to stay active and to stay busy, right? Participating. So if I put them all together, you're going to kind of see this flow here. And you're going to see on the left On the left here, things are generally closer to normal. On the upper right, you're going to see things are most affected. The reason I bring that up is when people are dealing with transition, they're dealing with crisis, they're dealing with this kind of turmoil, you can see that the mindset shifts because they're dealing with emotional circumstances. And if they're dealing with those circumstances, we have to pay attention to how it affects their behavior. Okay, so I'm telling you that to ask you this. How does this ultimately affect you? So based on the business that you're running, the ministry that you're a part of, the organization, the team that you're a part of coordinating, you've got to pay attention to how people are thinking differently to their current circumstances. Consequently, this would be the second big shift I would encourage us to make. Set expectations honestly, because we really do already know how a lot of people are planning to respond. Even if we don't know the specifics, we do know generally. So don't be overly optimistic about how it is that we want people to respond. Let's pay more attention to a higher level of awareness and say, honestly, here's where I think people are going to be responding, and I need to adjust accordingly. So I need to step away from what I think the mechanics are of a normal economy and a normal circumstance, and I need to start thinking, how does the emotional impact start to affect folks? And then moreover, when things do get back to a closer or a more a version of normal that's more consistent to what I know, how will I allow the shifts in their values and their attitudes to influence me moving forward? There are a couple steps that we can take, and this is the practical side, to how we should respond to folks who have the shifting mindset or the shifting behavior in the marketplace. First, I'm going to challenge you to say, make sure you're connecting with your audiences, and I'll give you some practical takeaways in just a second on how to do that. And I'm going to encourage you to be highly communicative. So I'm going to touch on both of these for just a couple of minutes, and then we'll wrap up. Regarding connection, it's not rocket science here. This is not the most novel idea. I'm just encouraging you and reminding you of what I think it is that you probably already know. One, it just requires effort, meaning your ability to connect with these audiences. And when I say audiences, if we're talking about family, you're talking about friends, you're talking about teams, well, it still applies. Your ability to connect requires, one, effort. Two, a level of selflessness to say, we're all dealing with transition and chaos right now. However, I am willing to actually put my own interests aside temporarily at the very least to say, how is it that I can connect with you? Generally, connection is built around common emotion that we share. And the examples, or at least in my opinion, some of the easiest examples of how to create this type of connection would be stories of impact. Meaning, how is it that the business, the organization that you're currently a part of is a part of impact, and ultimately how does it apply to your audience? I would put promotions together if you're a consumer goods brand or organization, meaning anytime an offer or a promotion comes out, it creates a positivity association for your audience. And that link or that emotion is a nice place for the two of you to connect, the two of you being your brand and the consumer or your audience. So find emotional moments to connect, or potentially anything that focuses on this principle of surprise and delight. You're trying to figure out, how do I help my audience feel like there's a connectivity here and it's not all transactional or it's not all mechanics. We're all seeing different people market right now online. I would definitely say don't stop marketing, but you're also seeing a lot of marketers who are taking advantage of circumstances in the marketplace, and the way that they're trying to market to folks doesn't feel like it's a connectivity. It's not connecting with them. There's not an emotional component to it. It's really about a transaction, and it's covered or sometimes disguised as like, hey, I'm really trying to help you. The reality is they're really trying to just do business, which I want people to do business. This is a time where people need to be staying in business and getting creative about how to do business. We just can't do it at the expense of not connecting with our audience. So connection is the first thing I'd encourage you to do. Second thing is communication. Regarding communication, it's got to be thoughtful. It requires discipline. This is the best way for you to stay connected with your audience and discover the insights that you need to know about the way that they're thinking right now. So earlier I said, we're going to get back to some more normal version of normal life at some point. Well, when we do, the attitudes and the values that they developed during this time are going to influence that time. So the more insight you have, not so much around the market at large, but around your specific audience, the people who buy your product, the people who attend your organization events, the people who come to your church, the more you've got insight around the way that they're thinking, the better off you're going to be to serve them down the road. That only comes generally through some level of communication. And then as a final reminder, don't forget that communication is interactive. as opposed to just being one way. Sometimes we can automate communication to the point where we start sending emails religiously to people, and we forget that there's actually a conversation here that can be had. Now, it can't always be had at the level that everybody wants it, but it does need to feel like it's interactive. So I will say, with that in mind, that there is a quality that I see in most of the leaders who I believe are the most effective at managing times like this. They're the most effective at managing crisis. They're the most effective at dealing with the emotional struggle that people are dealing with recession, is they figure out how to manage change and navigate it well, recognizing that the whole point of transition and chaos and change is that it's going to be different. And instead of shying away from different, they embrace different and say, how can we leverage it and actually use it to help serve our audience or our market or our consumers better. That is a challenge, because most of the time we have to decide, okay, am I willing to do what's required to get there? That's hard to do, but that is why not everybody fits into this category. But this is really the quality that I see primarily in the greatest leaders that I've watched or I'm watching go through this. Ultimately, you're not trying to win here and grow your business in the midst of uncertain times. I think that's a little unrealistic, although it does happen for a lot of folks. I think a smarter expectation is, can I stabilize or can I pick up market share and not focus on revenue and numbers right now, but can I help stabilize, build a foundation, connect with my audience so that when everything is back online and we're closer to a new normal, I'm much better positioned to have a role in their life. So when you go back to that positioning exercise about owning a spot in their brain, when they think about a product or a service or an experience, well, you've developed that relationship by connecting with them and communicating with them thoughtfully, that when they're back into a little bit more of a normal version of everyday life, they've got you top of mind when it comes to that specific category. All right. That is... I'm looking at notes from the folks who are helping me understand what everybody can see. That is the end. Thank you. If you need to get in touch with me, there's my email address. I'm Larry Hubacka pretty much everywhere online. And if you're interested in learning more about creating culture and how that plays out, you can go to You Little Jerk, or you can pick up the book online, or we can, we do a workshop with you or whatever it is. But if that's a topic of interest, there you go. All right. Thanks everybody for joining. I'm glad to have you today.